Hi, I'm Emily, and you're watching Threaded Journey. And today I'm going to show you how I made a really cute sweatshirt that I'm calling a business casual sweatshirt. I saw something similar in a store and was like, I think I can kind of take that idea and go with it. So I started out with this green flannel shirt that I had and added it to a sweatshirt. It went pretty well. Next, I did this bigger one for my daughter. Turned out super cute, and I figured out those steps that I was missing to do it a little bit easier and show you. So the one I'm showing you today is this one, and it turned out so cute, and I did it all without having to unstitch anything. Yay! So let me show you how to make this adorable business casual sweatshirt. You need a sweatshirt and a dress shirt, whether they're new or thrifted is up to you, but I do suggest at least one size bigger of sweatshirt than you normally wear, and the dress shirt needs to be at least the same size as your sweatshirt, if not a size bigger. What you're looking for is that the back of the shirt is at least as big as the sweatshirt is. And you'll see as we go through the steps and we're cutting why that is. First thing you're going to do is remove the band and the cuffs from the sweatshirt. Try to keep them as long as possible. That's why I'm unstitching from the side and then cutting them off from the sweatshirt. And you're going to want to save those for later. Next, I cut or unstitch the side seams and remove the sleeves at the shoulder seams. From the dress shirt, I'm cutting off the bottom portion of the shirt sleeves. I'm also cutting off the entire back panel below the yoke. Next, you're going to want to fold your sweatshirt pieces in half, clean up all your edges. This next part can look a little bit intimidating, and this is why you need for that back panel of your dress shirt to be as big as your sweatshirt, if not bigger. So you're going to lay your back pieces together. You're going to kind of move up and down that dress shirt until you get it to where that armhole matches. Cut off any excess. Then you're going to cut across, creating a new yoke piece in your sweatshirt and a new back panel piece for your dress shirt. Now you should have a sweatshirt front with a yoke on the back and a new back panel piece out of the dress shirt. You need 2 sleeves. Make sure you marked them a right and a left. You also have 2 dress shirt sleeves. You'll cut those more precise later. Also marked those a right and a left. You have your 2 cuff pieces for your sleeves that you've now squared up, and also the bottom band for the front of your sweatshirt. Now it's time to stitch it all back together. Clip your back panel pieces right side together. You're going to do a 1/4 of an inch or less seam allowance, and I realized that sewing with the woven piece on top keeps the sweatshirt from stretching while you're sewing. So just a little tip there. Now serge and top stitch your seam allowance. The next step we're doing is we're going to be working on this cuff part of our sleeve before we attach the sleeve to the sweatshirt, just because it's a little bit easier to work with. Now, originally, your sweatshirt sleeve was probably the correct length. If it wasn't, adjust for that, okay? But I'm assuming that your sweatshirt was the correct length. So what we're looking at with the first step is how much do you want this part to stick out from your cuff. All right, so I have both of my right sleeves here, and I'm looking at where I want my sleeve to come down. I've decided I want 2 inches of cuff showing, so I'm going to cut off 2 inches. I should have only cut off 1.5 inches for this because I did not think enough about seam allowance. So as you're looking at this, think a little bit more about seam allowance than I did, but right here I cut off 2 inches and I do not need that piece again. I can toss that piece, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other sleeve. Now cut your dress shirt cuffs about 1 inch from the opening. You want to make sure it's solid all the way around so that you have a good seam allowance, and do that for both sleeves. I stopped right here and sewed my cuffs. I did as small of a seam allowance as I could, then folded them so that the seam allowance is inside. I did that for both cuffs as well as the band for the front. You may need to adjust your seam allowance though for the front based on whether or not your front band was a 1-to-1 ratio or whether it's stretched. So keep that in mind as you're doing seam allowance. Our next step is going to be marking this cut line right here, okay? So you're gonna have to cut this part off to be able to make it like a cuff and stitch it all in together, okay? So that part's easy. The hardest part of stitching is top stitching this part, but if you can do it, it really does make it look nicer. Just kind of flattens it out, stretches it a little bit, and just makes it lay a little bit nicer. But that is the line that we're marking now. To find that line, we're going to put our cuff over the sleeve, overlapping for seam allowance. And then we're putting our cuff of our dress shirt where it is we want that to stick out from the cuff of the sweatshirt. And then we're marking that line right there where the top, I guess, of the dress shirt cuff comes to. So this is just going to be dependent on where you cut that dress shirt sleeve. I'll keep that, make sure you mark, you know, which one goes back on which sleeve, the right or the left. You are going to need a 1-to-1 ratio on all of these cuff pieces in order to get them back in. So you need to figure out your seam allowances, okay? Most likely your dress shirt is your smallest piece, unless you got a much larger dress shirt size, and then it may go in nicely. But what we're going to do is measure what the seam allowance is going to be for right here so that all of this can match up when you're doing it like a cuff. Lay your dress shirt sleeve on top of your sweatshirt sleeve and just mark where you need that seam allowance to be. And then you're just gonna take a little ruler and just kind of grade it up into your normal seam allowance all the way up to the top of that sleeve. Now you're going to do the same thing with the next part of the sleeve, that part that you cut off that will have the actual cuff attached. Now this part, we're going to create a split on it So you just need a 3/4 of an inch seam. So you're just coming down 3/4 of an inch at a matching seam allowance. Now that I did that little 3/4 of an inch stitch right there, before I top stitch that seam allowance down, I just want to make sure that I did the correct measurement. So I'm just going to line up that dress shirt cuff with these little pieces and just make sure that it fits together nicely. Now you can top stitch down that seam allowance, and then we're going to add on the cuff. We're just going to match it from one edge all the way around. Stitch it like you normally would a cuff, and then I like to top stitch the seam allowance to the sleeve. Set your completed cuff pieces aside for now. Decide if you want a split in your side seam. The green plaid shirt that I did does not have any kind of split in the side seam. The long one that I did has a pretty big slit. That was done for someone else, not me. And then this one that I'm wearing, I did a 1-inch split. And the split is just to make it lay nicely across your hips and not have any kind of a pull, or it's not being bunched up at your waist. So make that decision so that you know whether to stop or not. But you also need to decide whether or not you need to finish your seam. If you're doing a split seam, you need to finish your sides before you stitch. If you are not doing a side split, then you can serge it after you stitch up that side seam. It's time to attach your sleeves. So just take the middle of the sleeve, attach it to the shoulder seam, pull it to each side. Nothing special about this. You're just reattaching the sleeve basically just like it came off. And top stitch. Just a reminder to mark where you need to stop if you're going to create a split. And then you're just going to stitch up your sleeve and side seam all together. Now that your sleeve seam is in, you're going to put your cuff piece to the sleeve, right sides together. And I found it easier to go ahead and clip those in together first. And then put my cuff on. Now the dress shirt cuff is going to be different. It is going to be right side of the cuff to the wrong side of the sweatshirt sleeve. Okay, so make sure you're matching up your actual seam of the shirt and not the opening to the seam allowance of the sweatshirt, and then just re-clip all of those clips so that all three pieces are together. Once you have all three pieces clipped together, I would strongly suggest that you flip it out and just make sure that your opening is the right direction, that's facing the back of the shirt, that it looks right, all your pieces are layered correctly before you stitch that in. Once it's stitched together, finish your seam allowance and then top stitch it to the sweatshirt sleeve. This will be the most difficult part. For the last step, you need to add back on the bottom band. So find your middle of your front bodice and the middle of your band and match those up, stretching as needed. It'll just depend on the type of sweatshirt, whether you need to stretch or whether it's more of a 1-to-1 ratio. Now just stitch it together and then top stitch. And our business casual sweatshirt is now complete. Thanks for watching, and I hope your sweatshirt turns out amazing.